Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie, and this is episode 109. And we are going to be discussing GLP-1 drugs and their relationship to endurance sports and endurance athletes. These types of medications have become one of the biggest topics in health and fitness. And I think the conversation stems from the argument on, if I can weigh less, can I become faster? And we did an episode previously in our library. So if you go back and you find episode 73, we talked about weight and performance for endurance athletes. So this is an extension of that conversation where we want to see if there is a strategic use for these drugs, and if there is any kind of validity to the statement of, hey, if I'm lighter, am I faster? But then the argument becomes, well, if I'm faster, does that mean that I'm more durable? What are the consequences of using these types of strategies to make this quote unquote race weight? I know that this particular topic has been a hot button topic in endurance sports for years. The whole concept of trying to make race weight, that performance is some kind of function of your current weight, and is there an optimal weight that you should be in order to optimize your performance. And as we've now started to see the utilization of these types of drugs, should we be implementing these types of strategies in our training? And I want to talk to you a little bit about, how this topic came about. And this isn't just because it's a hot button topic. This was an actual conversation that I sat down with an athlete where he was talking about how he was using a GLP-1 drug because he had gained some weight. He had a 70.3 triathlon that was coming up like in October, and this is July, so we're talking still months away. But he wanted to use these types of drugs in order to shed the weight that he had been having a difficult time getting rid of. And he had a weight that was in mind, and his strategy was to use the drug until he made this particular weight, at which case he would suspend use of the drug and then hopefully try and maintain that weight. I guess that's a whole nother argument in itself. And I was sitting down with this guy, and I was talking with him, and, I had all these things that were floating through my head. What are the consequences of doing this types of thing? How much performance is he sacrificing in order to make this magic number that he was trying to achieve? And what was he losing in the process just to gain a performance potential down the road? And, what are some of the health ramifications associated with this when it comes to endurance athletes? Are we able to train with performance in mind, or do we have to shift our training paradigm to no longer train for performance, or should we start to shift more towards an exercise mentality where we're just looking for general overall health? Because there are absolute consequences to the use of these types of medications. So that's how this topic came about. And so I approached it with Katie, and I was like, let's talk about this, because I think that there's some interesting ideas that are here, some things that people need to be aware of. And I think I've seen them in my own research and other people that are coming out, talking about the consequences of these types of medications and what are the pros and cons of using them. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of like groundbreaking, information that's going to come of this, but I think that it's still nice to bring this conversation out to the forefront and just have one more episode come out and talk about, what are the consequences of these. I do want to be completely transparent with the listeners that are out there. Probably about now, what is it, like a 12 to 14, 15 years ago now, I had gastric bypass surgery. And this was before I ever got into endurance sports. So I do want to be transparent, even though it's not the same thing as a GLP-1. I have had, a weight loss surgery, and over the years, I've had to manage the uniqueness of my body as a result of this approach. So I don't want people to think, well, this guy is just a hypocrite because he's talking about, some kind of weight loss strategy where, he has in fact had one. But, so I do want to be honest about it and throw this out from the very start. Yes, I've had weight loss surgery. I've had regain, so I also struggle with the weight issue just like anybody else does, and I don't consider myself isolated from this. I still struggle with everyone else. So, Katie, let's dig into this. This is really more up your area of expertise. I can talk about it, from the performance side as a coach on, how I would approach an athlete who would come to me with this type of strategy, and how would I recommend it? Would I actually, take them on as an athlete onto my roster if this is the way that they wanted to approach it? I think that's a question that remains to be answered, from my perspective. But let's at least start talking about the physiological impact of these types of medications. What are they designed for? How are they being
Yeah.
used? Why should they be
We can make,
used?
a little bit of an
So
overview.
yeah,
Yeah, because I
let's talk
think,
about this. So let's kick this off. Let's go.
yeah, many people probably kind of have heard of them. GLP-1 medications, I mean, it's kind of all over the internet, I think. I think most people listening have probably heard of it at least, if not maybe thought about using them. And I think there's a lot of conversation, but I don't know if I'm aware of a ton of conversation about the use in endurance athletes specifically because, I just haven't heard much on that end. So I think this topic will be interesting because we are talking, generally about GLP-1 medications and then really specifically about endurance athletes and whether or not it's a good idea to use for an endurance athlete to use the medication. And I think I also want to preface this. It's like I've never really struggled with my weight like many people have. So I try to come at this as unbiased as I can. And actually, to be honest, I think these medications can have a lot of positive benefits for people. I want to try to come at this in more of like here's some of the pros and cons, and here's what endurance athletes specifically want to be thinking about, and more of like, here's the information, and you can kind of decide what will work best for you. But I don't want to put a ton of judgment other than I do think that for endurance athletes specifically, there are probably more risks involved than for somebody who isn't maybe as active. And it maybe has actually it's probably a lot of benefit for someone who has quite a bit of weight to lose. But then, it gets a little bit more in the gray area of whether or not somebody who only has 10 pounds or 20 pounds should be using these medications. And I don't necessarily want to pass judgment, but I do know that for certain individuals, these medications can be life-changing, just similar in a sense to something like bariatric surgery. It's a tool, like any tool. You either use it wisely or you don't, so it's not magic. But I kind of want to come at it like that from that perspective because some people might really benefit from these medications. And so I don't want to come at it with that sort of like, oh, it's all bad because
Right.
there may be some benefits. So let's just go quickly. Like, I think many people have heard of the medication, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on like what they are, but I think it does help to kind of talk about that and the mechanism a little bit because when we talk about risk, pros and cons, and some of the risks and some of the benefits, that would maybe be helpful to know. So I think the medications themselves, there's tons of different names. You can even get like compounding pharmacies that make GLP-1s. I mean, I'm not going to go into what type of medication and exactly if it's even safe to use compounding pharmacies and all of that information. There's a lot of information online on the actual each individual medication type, but there's like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, Saxenda. There's even like some more new age GLP. They're like, it's not just GLP-1 anymore. It's like several peptides that they're using that have different mechanisms. And so we can talk a little bit about that. But something like retatrutide, which is a new age, kind of newer GLP-1 type medication that's coming out, or it may still be in the research phase, but might be coming out soon. So there's medications that are even in development for that are kind of even more powerful maybe. So we can talk a little bit about that. But just as a reminder here, I mean, a lot of people think that these medications are like brand new, like we just came out with them. And they think that many people think that they're specifically for weight loss, but that's not the case at all. In fact, medications like Ozempic have been around for years. And when I was working in the diabetes, doing some work with diabetes back, maybe now 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I was working with people who were on Ozempic who had type 2 diabetes. And so it's actually, that's the original intention, is to help people control their blood sugar. And one of the side effects just so happened to be like that they were losing weight. And so I think then, it's really more recently, it's like, oh, well, what if we use these medications to help with weight loss? And so this whole weight loss trend for the medications is actually very new. Probably over the past, more recently, like 5 years is when I've really seen it kind of become a big thing. Maybe longer than that. But really, I didn't even think about it for weight loss when I was working with my type 2 diabetes patients back then. So just something to keep in mind, because I hear a lot of people saying like, oh, they're worried about using it because it's a brand new medication. They're not especially some of those older medications like Ozempic and maybe Wegovy or Mounjaro are actually pretty old. They've been around a while. I don't know how long. I probably should have looked that up, like when they were developed, but it's been here for a while. So don't think, oh, it's only been within the past 5 years that we've been developing these medications. We have had them around. We do know, we're starting to learn more and more about some of the side effects. We do at least have some information about their safety. So there may be some risk, but honestly, in general, they can be safe in the sense that there may not be like extremely unsafe consequences. Like occasionally people develop pancreatitis. There are some risks for certain things that can be serious, just like any kind of medication you take. But in general, there's quite a bit of safety around them in terms of like medical issues. Now we'll talk about some of the risks, pros and cons when it comes to the way the medication works and how that might influence not only our weight and appetite, but what types of foods we eat and how we fuel our bodies and how that might be an issue for endurance athletes. But in terms of like serious consequences, serious medical outcomes from using the medication, generally they're quite safe. Although there is, like any medication, some potential serious medical side effects. That's probably a good place to start. Let's just talk a little bit about how they work. Have you ever heard, I mean, I don't know, Justin, have you when you had heard the medication, did you get any information about like how they worked, or does it seem like it's just more like, oh, they're like, what have you heard about the GLP medications? I'm just curious.
mean, to be honest, I didn't really know much about them at all. I mean,
Okay.
before I started working with you as my nutrition coach, I went to my doctor and I was like, I can't get rid of this. I can't get this weight off, and I can't figure out. It's like the amount that I'm training just doesn't make sense on why it's just not going anywhere. And so, there was a panel of tests that we ran, and we did find some issues that I was dealing with at the time, but I don't think that those issues were enough to really kind of be the driving factor on why I couldn't seem to shed the weight despite the heavy training load. And so my doctor actually had suggested that he's like, hey, would you consider going on Wegovy? And he knew that I was already, a gastric bypass patient. He knew that I had bariatric surgery. And, when I started to dig into a little bit, I got to the point where I found out what the price point was, and I immediately shut it down because I was like,
Like,
no,
oh,
I'm
yeah.
good. I'll just suffer through it and figure it out. Because
That's another con that I didn't even put on here.
there's
The
no way
price.
that I'm willing to shell out that kind of expense just to lose some pounds.
Yeah,
But
makes sense.
I didn't really understand the mechanisms until I started later to start to see things, in reels from experts that were talking about how they were being used now. While I think there is a safety history, I've been involved with clinical trials before, as part of one of my jobs that I've had before, and so I think the argument becomes is, despite the fact that they have a pretty clean history. The question is does the history remain clean with the new utilization and the extent in which they are being used? I don't know. I mean, it very
Yeah, like
well
in the
it very well could persist, but
population of people. Yeah, because you have people now who don't have type 2 who are using the medications, and is
right.
there risk? And I think too, it's hard because it may be a while because you have to kind of see what
Clinical trials
happens.
take a really long time to
Yeah,
develop.
clinical trials
So,
take a while, and then even when you open it to the general population, if there are adverse side effects, and I have worked with people who have had some serious side effects, and I remember one woman had developed severe pancreatitis from that was linked to the medication, and she ended up losing part of her pancreas. No lo So she essentially almost developed, like, I can't remember the name for it when you develop diabetes, but it's because it was like the insulin wasn't being released like it should, so it was almost like a type 1 diabetes without it being autoimmune. There's a name for it, I can't remember, but it was like it's a serious consequence of using the medication, and I think there are certain medical conditions that put you at risk. So it isn't as though there are no, like, high risks, sometimes. And I mean, this is someone I've worked with, like,
yeah.
just in nutrition generally, working with her for just generally health, and I think also because she had that sort of diabetes that was caused by this. There are risks, and so, and I've seen it firsthand, so I don't want people to think, oh, there's no potential, like, very serious risks. It's just maybe fairly rare. I mean, they wouldn't put it out in the market if a lot of people were getting hurt, but it can have some serious
Yeah.
side effects. So I don't want to have it seem like I'm saying, oh, it's super safe, just because, and we just don't know. Like, yeah, with all of these people losing it, somebody who's an endurance athlete too. I mean, because of and I'll talk a little bit about that, because of our physiology, it might be something that might, put us at greater risk for certain things. Because we don't have diabetes, so we don't need to have increased insulin sensitivity, maybe. There might be some risks there. So we'll chat about it, but let's go over through uh, how they work. So
Yeah.
the GLP-1 refers to glucagon-like glucagon-like peptide 1. So it's just a type of peptide. It's basically like a hormone that our body naturally releases, our gut, when we eat. It's a hormone that it naturally releases and kind of sends that signal to our brain, like, hey, I'm full. It's time to stop eating. Except for with these medications, it's like a thousandfold. It's like this like signal is really amplified. I don't know how many fold, but it's like amplified with the medication. So you're kind of getting extra signal to your brain to say, hey, I'm full, right? So that's one of the benefits of the medication, is that for people who are maybe feeling like they're hungry all the time, that fullness signal is more amplified. And so that's really essentially part of it. The other part of it is that there's like a slowing gastric motility, like, so we don't have, so our contents of what we eat is more slowly released into the intestines, so it takes a little bit longer for the food to be digested, and that also kind of makes us feel a little bit more full, and maybe we don't eat as much. So there's like a couple of benefits with that. Some of the newer medications are kind of dual acting, so they're acting on different peptides. So there's like the GIP, GLP agonist medications that are not only the GLP-1, but they have the glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide is the other one. So sorry, that's a long word, but and I had to look at it because I'm like, what was it? But that's just basically another peptide or hormone. That's another type of signal. So they're basically now looking at different types of hormones that we have naturally that they can produce into like a medication to like amplify whatever that hormone does, and just kind of amplify it. So in that case, it can lead to even greater weight loss potentially. And then even some of these, like retatrutide, I think is that the name of it, but that one itself it also has, I think it adds maybe glucagon, which is a hormone that kind of causes I believe it causes the liver to stop really to not release, or what it yeah. I'm trying to remember. It stops it causes the liver to basically, I believe it causes, now I'm like trying to think what it does,
Uh,
because I'm like, what does the glucagon do? I'm like, basically helps us from having the glucose drop too low. So like it kind of
oh,
helps
okay.
with glucose regulation. So sometimes when someone has type 1 diabetes, they'll have that particular medication, and I believe it works kind of on the liver to kind of just help keep our blood sugar a little bit more stable. So it
Mhm.
helps maybe kind of counteract potentially some of the other things that the medications are doing. Because what I didn't mention is another thing that the medication that these GLP medications can do is um, the reason it's so helpful for people who have diabetes is it can kind of help increase our insulin sensitivity and how we utilize glucose. So if you have insulin resistance, it can kind of help with that piece as well. So the glucagon is kind of like sometimes added, I think, maybe as another mechanism to kind of help stabilize glucose a little bit. But you can see how they're adding all these different medications in to sort of help enhance, the benefits, and work on different mechanisms to
Yeah.
help with weight loss. So we'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on these sort of just dual or triple or even quadruple or whatever, five acting, they're using five different peptides or five different types of um, things to kind of work in different aspects. Like I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I feel like it's, are we just trying to cause people to never be hungry? Like I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing either. Like if you're just taking something and you just never feel like eating, like we do need to eat to fuel. So, there may be something there that I'm kind of like, okay, at what point are we gonna like just sort of stop? We don't have to like, maybe go crazy with these medications. But
Hmm.
there are some coming out that are kind of more acting on different like basically hormone receptors, different creating mimicking sort of different peptides that we have naturally in our body that help us basically feel full sooner, stay full longer, snack less, and think about food less. So, one of the benefits that people generally describe to me are that they tend to say, I don't think about food as much. I feel full sooner, but but that food noise is gone,
Yeah.
right? So, and a lot of people I think have that, I mean, when I'm hungry, I think about food sometimes, but I think there are individuals who think about food a lot and it's taking up a lot of space in their brain, and the food noise is gone, which I think is a good benefit to it. So it's not to say that can be really like life changing for some individuals who have a lot of that food noise. So there's a benefit. Um, and then, we'll talk about some of the issues with athletes, but you could see how, I mean, if it's taking your gut a little bit longer to digest the food, you could see how that might be problematic in certain situations for athletes. I think the big overarching thing why people actually lose weight is that all of these things contribute to lower calorie intake. So people just eat less and they lose weight because it still comes down to what we eat, like how much we eat, right? It's
Yeah.
that equation of energy in versus energy out. There's no other magic way to lose weight generally, like the keto diet versus, there's no magic way to eat everything you ever wanted and still lose weight. It still comes down to that equation. And what this medication does is we just eat less. And that's how we lose weight. And so that's essentially what the medication's doing. There isn't really any other magic. Potentially the insulin sensitivity benefits if somebody does have type 2 diabetes, maybe. But because we do know that insulin resistance is associated with weight gain and stubborn weight loss, so there could be some potential benefit there for weight loss. But essentially, it's nothing really any more magic than that. It just has us, or just causes us to eat less, and therefore we lose weight. That's I guess, the takeaway from that whole conversation on how the medications work.
Yeah. So
What do you want me like?
I want to compare it a little bit to the bariatric surgery itself, because when I was talking with
Mhm.
this guy, he was talking about some of the so-called side effects, or quote unquote benefits of being on the medication was similar to the benefits that I had when I had my surgery. So it was the absolute removal of hunger pains. You could go all day and just not get hungry. And that's the way that I was when, I had my surgery. I just no longer would become hungry. And I mean, even to this day, I still don't get hunger pains like I think a quote unquote normal person would, somebody with a normal digestive system. And so I'm kind of curious on if when we compare the medications to the surgeries, is it just that the surgery just would completely manipulate the digestive system and the storage capacity in order to take in food? I would imagine there would have to be some kind of disruption of hormone production as a result of that manipulation. But the drugs are basically doing the same thing. They're just manipulating the hormone side of it without altering the
Without altering
digestive,
the
without
yeah.
altering the digestive system and the storage capacity of
Mhm.
food intake.
Yeah, it's
So
basically, yeah, I mean, the gastric bypass, you're absolutely right. It just causes the stomach to be very, very small. So that limits how much we can eat on its own. So then you feel full much quicker, and so those signals go to your brain, and it slows down a little bit, or it can slow down sometimes gastric emptying a little bit too with those surgeries, but um, maybe not, maybe it depends on the individual a little bit. But I know that, because you have such a small, stomach now, it's basically just more that those signals are happening sooner
yeah,
and they're a little more amplified in that sense. But it's just similar but one is like a medication and one is a surgery, that you do, that you're actually having to, go and alter go through a potentially like serious surgery and alter
yeah.
your entire gut. So, I can't say like whether I would recommend one over the other, because if you want, like, there's a lot of discussion about these medications as being especially for someone who's trying to lose weight and keep it off, that they may be more lifelong
That's
medications
what I was about to just
that
say. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a cost to it potentially, and you then have to be on a medication potentially for the rest of your life. Now, is it possible for you to stop taking them and maybe keep the weight off? Potentially, but it could be very hard to do that. Like it is hard to, lose weight and keep it off. So I think there's benefits to the surgery, is that, if you're doing it right, like supposedly like you do the surgery and you don't have to worry about it so much the rest of your life. Although there are unfortunately
Mm.
people that like regain the weight and struggle. So I don't know if that's a foolproof thing, but the medications are meant to be more lifelong. They're meant to help people who have a lot of weight to lose, or type 2 diabetes with weight to lose the weight and then maybe stay on, maybe not a high dose, but some dose of the medication potentially for the rest of their lives. So it's not really meant, these medications I don't think were meant to be for just short-term weight. I mean, essentially, um, it's it's like I understand that, people want to lose the weight and it's hard to lose weight. Like it's not easy. I've worked with so many people who have just struggled to lose weight. Even a little bit, working with you, Justin, just like
Yeah.
some of the things of like, why is it like, what the heck is going on? It's so frustrating, right? Because we're trying all these things and we're reducing calories, and I get it's hard. And so I think the pull to like use a medication to get there um is I understand that, but it's, if you don't have some sort of plan while you're on the medication to make sure you're doing it correctly and eating correctly so you don't lose muscle mass and things like that, and then if you don't have some sort of plan for when you come off the medication of how you're going to keep the weight off, the medication is no different in some ways, other than it's maybe much easier, then it's really no different in my opinion than maybe a fad diet,
Right.
because essentially you're just using more of a medication rather than, food restriction to get there. But I mean, you're still restricting food, but the medication is helping with that, right? And then if you don't have a plan, unfortunately, there are so many, I don't know, stories, I guess, or even people I've worked with who are coming to me after they've used GLP-1, gain all the weight back. And then they're like, well, now I, like now I want to either go back and do it correctly or not use the medication and try to do it on my own. But it becomes a yo-yo diet thing where people are
Mhm.
then losing the weight to get to a weight using the medication. And then if they don't have a plan for how that's going to be maintained, they gain it all back. And to the research on yo-yo diet, the yo-yo weight of going up and down and up and down in weight, the outcomes are far worse than if you were to just stay at whatever weight you're at and just maintain it, even if you're technically overweight or obese according to the BMI. But if you're healthy, it's better to maintain it than to try to yo-yo back and forth. So the caution I would give people is, if this is something you're actually thinking about using, whether you're an athlete or not, to think about how you're going to do it safely so that you don't compromise your metabolism or your muscle mass and your health. And then how are you going to transition once you decide you've met your weight goal to coming off of the medication and maintaining that weight? Because you don't want to be going even 20 pounds up and down isn't good for you. So we want to be really trying to think about that. I'm not saying that the medication isn't a tool. I think it could be a tool. You just need to use it wisely, right? Like, don't risk your health just to get to a weight that you want to be at. And I say that, but I do know that people struggle, and there's a lot of stigma, and there's a lot surrounding weight that, in our society. I mean, I'm not going to go into all of that. I know that, so there's a lot there. It's like a loaded thing, but I think, I understand, and I think it's a great tool, but we need to use it wisely. So yeah, so let's dive into like the athlete piece.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? I mean,
Yeah, you did.
Think for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether you choose to do anything, whether it's GLP-1 or a bariatric surgery, I think bariatric surgery obviously takes a little bit more of a thought because it's a surgery, but either way, I think you need to go into it kind of being prepared and just realizing it's a tool and not a magic. There's nothing magical really about it. You just have to use it as a tool, not as this is going to solve all my problems kind of thing.
Right.
So why athletes? Like, I don't know. So did you mention this when you kind of did your intro? Because you had talked to me about it, but when you were talking to that athlete, weren't they telling you a little bit about what their experience with it and how much they were eating? Like, did you mention that?
This guy was effectively eating like one meal a day. And he did tell me an episode where he did a bit of a refeed. So there was one day where he had like 3 meals, but by and large, he's been eating like one meal a day. It was a heavy protein meal. And so, as we were talking, I made it perfectly clear. I was like, you are going into every single workout depleted. So glycogen stores are going to be way down. I questioned him on whether he had any kind of intensity in his training plan. Because my concern for it was that he just wasn't fueling enough in order to do higher intensity efforts. Like if he was just going to be doing all kind of like zone 1, zone 2 kind of stuff, and this whole like maybe become more fat adaptive rather than relying on carb stores and like glycogen stores in order to fuel his workouts. And he said no, he still had some intensity in his training plan. And we were actually on a group ride, and it can be a little challenging of a course. So there's some rolling hills, and it was hot, and he's definitely a much stronger athlete than I am. And he had a lot nicer gear, faster gear than I did, but I stayed in his back pocket the whole time, which surprised me because I was like, how am I keeping up with this guy? Because this guy is a machine. And we were on the last loop of the route because it's just one big circular loop, and we just do as many as we can within the span of like 60 minutes. And he dropped off on the last loop, and he just said he just hit a wall and he just bonked. But I kept going. I mean, I was perfectly fine. I could have kept riding for hours. And it caught me off guard because I was looking behind him and I was like, how am I like just overtaking this guy? I was like, this doesn't make much sense. Either I'm a lot stronger than what I'm giving myself credit for, or something's going on. And so I was like, no, Justin, don't get a big head here. You're not all this great. So I said, I was trying to figure it out, and I kept looking behind me to see where he was at. He just disappeared. And so apparently he just dropped off, and he was just like, I was done. He just hit a wall. Yeah. And he said that has been happening with him. And so I questioned, I was like, well, how are you just like maintaining any kind of like performance, trying to train for performance versus just training for fitness. And I was like, how are you getting through workouts? Because I mean, even at the 70.3 level, some of the workouts are kind of long, and they can have some good intensity in them. So it's not like it's, full Ironman distance where we're going a little bit lower intensity and we're just going for hours and hours. Trying to pace a 70.3 can be a little bit challenging because there is some intensity involved. And I was like, how are you doing this? And the argument that he was making was that he had so much time before he really had to be concerned about trying to gain performance that he figured he was going to make his quote unquote race weight within like the next, I don't know, couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And so for typically for a half Ironman, I would recommend a 16-week plan if you go into it with good solid fitness already. And so that's what I was telling him. I was like, okay, well, you got what, like a 16-week plan? And I was like, probably as long as you're able to ramp things up around the 8-week mark, you have 8 weeks to kind of stack on some nice solid performance, to reach your peak, so that you can go into the race at your highest. And he said, yeah, that was his hopes, and that he would be able to time this perfectly to where he would have 8 or 9 weeks left before the race would hit, to where he could then ramp things up. My gut was telling me that even if he did time it perfectly, he was going to be in no condition to really ramp things up. I think that it was going to delay things, and he would need more than 16 weeks in order to execute a fairly decent 70.3 plan, because he was spending, I think, so much time, what would be equivalent to low-end aerobic training, and the fact that he may not be able to finish a lot of his workouts would lead me questions like, okay, well, what kind of shape are you going to be in with 8 weeks left, to where you could then stack on that intensity without getting hurt? That was my concern, because we know with the rapid weight loss comes the cannibalization of lean muscle mass. That happens with weight loss surgery, just like it happens with GLP-1 medications as well. So it's not something that is unique to that particular strategy. I just think it involves, with just rapid weight loss like that, the body is that's where it's going to pull from. I think it's just the area of least resistance, because when it starts to try and pull from fat, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but was he telling you how much he was losing, like a week, or any sort of idea of like how much he had to lose, or was there any?
I can't recall off the top of my head, but the amount that he had lost, like in the span of like 3 weeks, was highly significant. We were talking like 20 pounds, like in the span of just several weeks. And I was like, dude, that is insane. And so I said, do you have one of these scales that kind of, reads like lean muscle mass, water weight, and all this kind of stuff? I was like, do you have a high-tech scale to where you can track the loss of lean muscle? And he said, yeah, he did. And he said, I know I'm going to lose some lean muscle, but I'm in the weight room and I'm focusing on the one meal that he did eat was going to be a high-protein meal. And something just didn't sit right. It just didn't.
I agree with you. I think
it wasn't computing with me. So I was like, I don't really know the guy very well, and he already he has a coach, and so I was just flat out honest with him. I was like, I bet your coach is pretty pissed at you right now. He's like, yeah. So I was like, because I was like, there's no way that I would be thrilled with my athlete if they came to me and said, this is what I'm doing. And I'm not seeking your permission. I'm just letting you know that this is what's going on, rather than try and strategize about it. So I was like, I imagine your coach is pretty irate right now, but maybe he just didn't. I don't know the relationship with them, but I know that I would be. So yeah, I would. It just didn't sit right. I was like, I don't care how much you're in the weight room, and you're an endurance athlete already. So I know that you're not in the weight room very much, because you're trying to still juggle swim, bike, and run. And I was like, at most, you're probably lifting like twice a week. And so I was like, okay, well, that's maintenance lifting, really. And I said, with one protein meal a day, I can almost guarantee that you're not taking in enough of the amino acids to repair the muscles that you are damaging through strength conditioning and aerobic training, as well as trying to stave off muscle loss. I was like, you would have to eat a lot of protein in order for that to happen. But
Mhm.
maybe I'm wrong.
Probably a lot more than you can get in one meal,
I
I
would
would
imagine it would
assume.
be a lot more than like
Yeah.
one meal a day. That's like
Yeah.
eating like one chicken breast a day and just be like, okay, that's all the protein
I mean,
I'm
even if it's
getting.
like
But
a large
that's
amount, like
ridiculous.
a big,
Yeah,
8 ounces or 10 ounces, it's still not gonna be enough because 'cause it'd be only like 70 grams,
yeah,
and even then, there's a little bit of interesting, like, data or research on, like, how much we can actually synthesize and utilize at once. I mean, it's actually better to have s some doses throughout the day potentially for
right.
muscle
Spread it out.
maintenance. But yeah, that is interesting. I have some thoughts. I feel like, I mean, I guess my first thought would be like, wow, there's like this obsession or something about being at some sort of race weight that he's deemed that he needs to be at. And I have fearful that he's going to end up like maybe achieving that, but at the sacrifice of his race going
Yeah.
well. Because fundamentally, if you're not fueling properly, you're just not going to be able to get a lot out of your training. You're going to, with all those things you're mentioning. So I don't know. And then part of me thinks, wow, we're hitting like a boundary there of some sort of disordered eating, like it's kind of blurring some lines there, like for me of just like, wow, this is like what's really going on here fundamentally. Is it really like a desire to perform well, or is there something else kind of happening here? Because or is there some sort of extreme misinformation about that sort of you have to be at race weight to like perform well? Is there some sort
Yeah.
of some he's consuming information he's consuming that's kind of like telling him that, and he's not getting the facts correct about what it takes to actually perform well. So
I
I don't
thought.
know, like there's something deeper there that and I don't know this guy, but it's sort of like, wow, that there's a lot of red flags that I'm like, this is concerning. As his coach, if I were coaching someone like that, I would definitely be like, this is really worrying me. Like that amount of weight, it's obvious even if you're eating even if you were eating a lot of protein, like you're still gonna lose muscle mass, and he did say he was gonna accept that, but um, yeah, I just don't know, like, at what risk, because, if it's several weeks or months that he's taking to do that, and I mean, the amount of calorie deficit he must be in is pretty substantial,
Mhm.
and, we know that there can be disruptions in hormones and things like testosterone for men, and that can have very severe consequences long term.
Yeah.
It can take months sometimes to restore testosterone and feel good again. I've worked with men, I've worked with women, but I've worked with men also who've actually had like maybe through an eating disorder or something else happening, like relative energy deficiency in sport, where they had underfueled and it's detrimental to their performance. But then it takes months and months for them to actually like recuperate and be able to gain back any performance, because even after you're eating adequate amount of calories, it takes a lot sometimes to kind of
Mhm.
restore all the balance, especially some of our hormones. So
Yeah.
that kind of worries me that, what is he considered like the longer term consequences of this? It's not just about making race weight and then like having 8 weeks to train and you're just gonna, like you're saying, bounce back into it, feel great. There could be some really long term consequences that could not only affect his performance in his race, but longer than that, further out. That could take a while to come
Yeah.
back from. And so, as a coach, I would be definitely explaining this. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe not all coaches feel comfortable doing that, but
Yeah.
I think because I have a unique background, maybe I don't know, maybe then I would feel more comfortable explaining those sorts of things to somebody and really trying to help them understand that. Who's prescribing him these medications? Like as a doctor, I would,
Yeah. I
you're
don't know.
supposed to be the way to do it safely is you really need to be working with like a practitioner, like a physician, and you should be ideally working with like a dietitian. So like that's the ideal scenario. So is somebody just prescribing this like willy-nilly? Like where is he getting it? Online? Is it a compounding pharmacy that
I
he's
don't
just
know.
getting it through some sort of program and there's no oversight? Like that worries me a little bit. And, those are, I think, some of the things that we'll dive into. But, yeah, I mean, I think this kind of really hits on like, I mean, I think it's like that race weight piece is really why I think athletes might be doing it. I mean, I don't think he's alone. I feel like there's
No,
probably
he's
more
definitely
athletes
not
out there.
alone. And I mean, to be honest, I don't really know the guy very well. I've had just a couple interactions with him. In this one conversation that I was having with him, I did pick up some behavioral things that were going on. So I think it's interesting that you touched on this, because the guy is a high performing athlete. And he made a statement during the conversation where he said, if I don't make the podium, I'm pissed at myself. And I think
Right.
that was just, as a coach, I'm sitting back saying, huge red flag. I
Right. Yeah,
see a lot of lights flashing right now. And so I can understand why his mind is going this way and why he perceives that this is the key to his performance is not training. It's making this particular weight, because he has seen performance materialize and he was at that weight. I
Yeah.
understand the logic.
He's making that connection there.
That's
Yeah. Like
that's
this, I
connection.
have to be at this weight,
Right.
otherwise I will not
Because it's the
perform.
connection that I've made in my own mind as well, where, I was smaller, I had better performance, I would be able to run faster, I was faster on the bike because it was just easier to ride at a lower weight, so I had a better power to weight ratio, and so I was a better performing athlete. But
Right.
I've gotten to the point now where I've just kind of given up on it, where it's just like, look, this is just what it is. My performance can either be hindered or helped, and I don't know if it's going to be helped if I lose the weight. Maybe if I can just become a strong and durable athlete, I can still perform. Granted, I'm several years older than I was before, so this is just a natural progression, but I can't expect to perform the way that I did when I was 35, because I'm not 35, I'm 49. So if I were to get back to the same weight that I was at when I was 35, would I see the same kind of performance? I don't know. I can't say that for certain. So to make the assumption that, oh, I need to be at this particular weight in order to see the same performance that I had when I was at that weight doesn't necessarily jive. With me, it doesn't. Be strong enough to stand the test of time is my
Yeah,
argument.
and I want people to kind of really think, if someone's listening, is kind of resonating with them, and they're like, wow, I'm like fixated on this weight from, that I performed my best race at 35 or some whatever it is, and I was at this particular weight, and they're like fixated on that number. To think about this, because there's a lot of things that influence our weight, and body composition does, and our weight can go up a little bit as we age, and it can be really much harder when we're older to like be back at the weight we were at in our 20s. That may just not be feasible. And to get there, what you might have to do to get there could be very risky in terms of not only your health, but maybe your performance, if that's really what you want. So like there may be a way to do it, but I don't think the way that this gentleman's going about it is a very good way to do it. So we'll kind of talk about that. But I think thinking about that, like the why someone is so tied to a specific weight, are you hard on yourself, or is there something you're like, your weight is like somehow equivalent to your worth as a person or something? Like that's not like, just thinking about it, like, is there something more to it, like deeper like that? Because I would really like to encourage people to try to get away from that concept of race weight, or like there's a specific weight that they need to be at to perform, and instead, maybe there is a benefit to some weight loss, but maybe, but we don't know that for sure. So trying not to like put so much pressure on that, and instead thinking about how maybe better you could perform better by just fueling better and having a great training plan, and like maybe some loss will happen just in that. But, and sometimes it's surprising what happens when you're actually fueling your body adequately. Like what happens with your body composition, and what happens with, your weight naturally getting to a place where it naturally ought to be, So I would just encourage people to think about that. I think the not only the race weight, but I think athletes tend to kind of want to maybe think about these medications for like the power to weight ratio. That's when, maybe they're calculating that somehow. They're like, oh, if I were lighter weight, I'll be at, better at this, or a faster uphill running, or faster going biking uphill or running uphill, or maybe somebody's really focused on looking extra lean and they want to be like 5% body fat or something, like I don't know, like sometimes people have sort of skewed versions of what they, or they think that's going to help them perform better. I don't
Yeah.
know. So there's probably pressure too coming from social media a little bit here, maybe. Like, I don't see a lot of, like, I haven't seen other athletes out there like saying, hey, you should really consider this, but maybe I'm just not seeing it. But I do see a lot of like influencer type people out there, like, touting these medications as like, though this is the best thing ever. And I do see some of that. And I caution caution you to
Yeah.
not trust certain people, everybody, anybody on social media who just has a general opinion about them. And there's some negative opinions too. And so I think sometimes people feel like it seems like a lot of people might be using the medications, but no one really wants to say they are because not well, maybe the gentleman you talked to said he was, but some people I think there's like some stigma with it too. So there's a lot going on here. But so we talked a little bit about the race weight and we talked a little bit about the performance piece, but let's just talk about like maybe some benefit. Like let's go
Yeah.
into some benefits that an
Mhm.
athlete or just anybody might experience using the medication. So we've already talked about this, but let's say like a scenario where we do have an athlete or somebody who's very active and they have like the definition of obesity is a BMI over 30, right?
Mhm.
So not to say that that really means, that's a population-based measurement. I'm not going to go into what BMI is and whether it's a good measurement or not. But let's say we do have an athlete who, would benefit or feels that they would benefit from losing some weight, and maybe they do have type 2 diabetes or some other condition that they would really benefit from it to use the medication. I mean, there are benefits. I think that's probably the category of people I would say would benefit the most from this medication would be individuals who have a lot of weight to lose potentially and or have like a metabolic condition like type 2 diabetes. That's really where this medication is going to be the best. And so improving metabolic health, lowering blood sugar potentially, it does have some benefits of lowering cardiovascular risk.
Mhm.
So there's benefits there. Maybe then like if you're losing weight, less joint stress, maybe returning to exercise a little bit easier. Um, if you're maybe I think this could be beneficial for someone who was an athlete who has weight to lose, who maybe or
Yeah.
wants to be active and they're realizing that the weight that they have is kind of hindering them and maybe they have other conditions and they're like, I want to be healthier and start exercising more and being more athletic. Sure, like because you're probably going to do the medication before you, jump into something like like a serious training program or something.
Yeah.
So that type of individual will probably benefit a lot. Um, but really, like blood pressure, blood glucose, maybe even help for something like sleep apnea. There's a lot of benefits these medications can have, mostly with some of the glucose regulation and then the weight loss itself.
Yeah.
Um, there might be some like psychological benefits we mentioned of just like reducing the food noise. Maybe as somebody's not having so much food noise, they can continue to work on their relationship with food. So they can start to um, maybe work with counselors or things like that to improve their relationship with food and hunger. And so maybe if they do come off the medication, it could allow them that sort of opportunity. Um, but it's very different than somebody, who has only a few pounds to lose or 20 or less pounds to lose. That's sort of a different scenario than, the benefits for somebody who just has a little bit of weight to lose. I don't know. I mean, if you're someone struggling, like you really, really feel like you would benefit from that loss of weight,
Mhm.
and you feel like this is the only option you have, like, okay, I don't wanna pass judgment on that. That is what it is, but just make sure, like, I'm gonna talk about do it in a way that is safe and you have a plan and you're working with someone that can help you. So once reach your weight you wanna be at, you have a plan of how you're gonna maintain. But I think that becomes this, like, medically, like, somebody's using this medication to improve their health versus just, like, aesthetically.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're getting into this point where people are using this to be able to look better, and I don't know, it gets a little bit gray. I don't wanna say one person has the right to use it and someone else doesn't, but I think if someone's trying to lose 10 pounds and they think they need to use a medication, I would really encourage them to kinda maybe dig deeper into, like, their relationship with their body and
So
just general body image
yeah.
things, because it's like there's something there deeper. Maybe really like dig into like your body image and why it is that you need to like just lose a few pounds. And if you still feel like you need to use the medication, then so be it. But that might be more of that sort of issue versus like an actual medical need or um, benefit on a medical side from losing the weight. Does that make
Yeah, so
sense?
if you mentioned that this would be it would be an option worth considering. I'll put it that way.
Mhm.
If you had quote unquote a lot of weight to lose. So my question to you is, are you comfortable quantifying that? Like what does it mean by a lot of weight? Because if you have
That's a good
somebody
question.
who's, let's say, 200 pounds, to them, getting down to,
A lot of
170,
weight.
that's 30 pounds is that's
Mhm,
a,
mhm.
that's a lot of weight to lose relative to where they are, versus somebody who may be like 260 and wants to get down to 200. That's 60 pounds to lose,
Right.
but the proportion of that weight loss relative to where they're starting from, is that considered to be a lot of weight to lose, or is it
Yeah, that's a
not?
good
So
question.
that's my question to you,
That
is like,
I think, yeah,
how
that's
can we
where it gets a
quantify it?
little bit murky, right? Because it's like, where do we like, if you wanted to set boundaries for who could and who could not use the medication, where do we set those boundaries? And I have people I work with or I have one woman I work with currently who has type 2 diabetes, and she is put on Ozempic because she needs to control her diabetes, but she doesn't need to lose weight, so there's still that piece of it too. I think that's hard to say. You're needing to lose the weight because it might benefit you medically. Maybe that would be more the reason, but it's hard because, yeah, at what point do we say, well, if you only have 20 pounds to lose, then or less, then that you don't need to use the medication. But
Yeah.
if it's above 20 pounds, like I'm not going to be the one to dictate that necessarily.
Yeah, because I just did the math in the
Yeah.
scenario that I came up with. So if you're 200 and you want to get down to 170, that's 15% of your body
Mhm.
weight that you want to lose. Versus if you're 260 and you want to get down to 200, that's about 23%.
Percent.
So
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
you have
to
more. So
me,
what
to me, it
percentage?
makes more sense to think about it in terms of percentages, like how much
Yeah,
body
maybe
weight
like
do you.
above 10% if
Yeah,
you
if you
have
want to, if
anything
you need
above
to lose
10%.
like
Yeah.
anywhere of like 10 to 20%,
Or more. Yeah.
is it worth doing? Or if
Yeah. It
you're,
might be. Yeah.
then that's the question.
Might
So
be.
that's
Yeah,
what
that
I'm
might be a good
that's what I'm
cutoff if
thinking.
I had to give a recommendation. But again, like if somebody's really like they're 20 pounds or less that they have to lose, and they just like I don't know. I just think that it's hard, because at what point do you sort of just accept, especially if you're healthy overall, like what risks are you willing to take to lose the weight? And there are risks with the medication, and so at what point is it become a little bit of a gray area of like, yeah, is it vanity or is it health, and who gets to decide what scenario someone uses it. And I don't know. Like it's hard because I've never been in a situation where I've had 20 pounds and they just I won't budge. And I've tried every single diet out there, and I've tried everything, and I've worked with a nutritionist, and I've done all the, like I know there are people out there like that. And
Yeah.
so what point do I say, "No, well, you don't really need it, it's because you only have 20 pounds to so like, figure out your body image issues, but maybe somebody really feels like they would feel better about themselves. Maybe they would, I don't know. So it's really hard to decipher that. But let's just talk. I mean, I think that gets into, like, the murky waters of, like, I don't know, like, ethical things or something, like, who's
Yeah,
the
you
ethics of
definitely
it or
have to
something.
weigh the cost versus the benefits of doing it.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
if
anybody does, like,
if I if I were
is it
coach
worth
if I were
it?
coaching
Yeah.
this guy, I mean, and he said that this is the strategy that he was going to implement, then I would honestly have to tell him that I have to change your training plan because of the path that you have chosen. I can't
Yeah.
train you like I would if you were off the medication. So that's a
Well,
that's a
let's talk
consequence that
about
you'd
the
have that
athlete.
you'd have to take
Yeah,
on.
because we're talking about just general, but let's talk about the athlete population, because this is where I think it gets, regardless if you have 20 pounds to lose or 60 or 70, what, as an athlete, should you be using the medication? I think there's some things that you really want to consider, because the cons maybe in this scenario of being an endurance athlete may outweigh the benefits, especially if you're doing what this gentleman was doing, which is trying to do this while he's in the middle of a 16-week sort of training plan to get to this race. Like that, let's sort of talk about when it might be appropriate and the risks that can come with that. So like the first one, let's just talk about why it would be risky. And then we can go into the potential benefits and when it might be okay or possibly a good time to use a medication like this to help with weight loss. So the one I think of with him specifically, I already mentioned, is RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport. It's just that you're eating way less, or than you're expending in your body. You're putting a lot of stress on your body. People don't realize when they're under fueling significantly how much stress they're putting on their body. It's significant. And then, on top of it, you have this extreme stress of under eating because your body is like, I'm not getting the fuel I need. And that's a very stressful situation. And on top of it, you're doing high intensity exercise, maybe you're it's just a recipe for disaster in my mind, because I do think not only are you going to kind of feel crappy during the workouts, but you're setting yourself up, especially if this is ongoing over weeks or even a couple months. It could happen. This doesn't have to be something that's like years long. It could happen if someone's doing something extreme over the course of 2 or 3 months. So that hormone dysfunction, like decrease, you're just not recovering. Like that guy's probably just not recovering very well. I mean, how could you when you don't have the building blocks to repair tissue and to recover? You have fatigue, he's setting himself up for potentially getting like a pretty significant illness, like flu or something like that, and being taken out by it, and that can happen to anybody training high volume. But when you're not recovering with fuel, that happens. Injury, poor performance, like we've already talked about that. So that's my one concern in that scenario. So I would not advise someone to decide, hey, I've just signed up for this race in 16 or weeks or so. Now I need to get to my race weight. I'm going to use a medication and try to lose a significant amount of weight. That is not where I would advise these medications be taken. I would recommend that you just, if you want to race, if you absolutely need to, maybe just accept where you're at and try to fuel your body correctly. And then maybe, we'll talk about the timing of it, but just my opinion, it's risky. He could end up being okay. You never know. Some people are resilient, but I think a lot of people kind of in that scenario would have some issues. Not to mention like the muscle loss, which we already talked about. Like at some point, even if he were eating like what he's doing, he needs to be eating at least 2 grams of protein per kilogram, or maybe 1 gram per pound or a little more of protein, but it's just really hard to get that in one meal. You'd have to eat a lot of protein. So I'm guessing he's not even getting that amount. So in the amount of catabolism or breakdown that's happening with the extreme calorie loss, he's losing muscle, no doubt. And he might be losing a lot more muscle than he thinks. Even if you're strength training, it's not enough really to like kind of maintain muscle in that scenario. So yeah, that would be my concern with athletes, is like we don't generally want to lose our muscle, right? That's really what's carrying us over. Unless you have like a body build or you're like a power lifter and you're going into a running, wanting to run a marathon, maybe you have some muscle you could lose, but most of us want to maintain our muscle, right? And we don't want to lose body fat. So I don't think that's a real recipe for losing. It's a recipe. What he's doing probably is losing both fat and a lot of muscle, which is hard. That's one of the major concerns of the medications themselves for anybody using them, is that loss of muscle mass. And most of the time people, if they're not paying attention to how much protein they're eating, and they're truly just, eating less, they don't eat enough protein. Most people who do the medication and don't have any sort of oversight of a dietitian, or they're not paying attention to protein, will just, because they're eating less, eat less protein. And then that's the reason usually why they're losing muscle. Well, that's a really big deal, because muscle is one of the most metabolic tissues. So if you're losing muscle, then your metabolic rate goes down. And so if you do come off the medication, you're then going to have a lower metabolic rate. And then it's going to make it much harder for you to maintain that weight loss. And
Right.
so you have that potential to gain. Not to mention, like, when we get old, like sarcopenia or loss of muscle is, so if someone's doing this in their 20s and 30s and they're compromising their muscle, what's going to happen to those individuals when they're 40, 50, 60? Like, it's harder to gain muscle and you're sort of fighting to maintain it at that point, right? So
Right.
they're going to be at much higher risk for something like sarcopenia or loss of muscle, and that is a serious problem for elderly and most people kind of maybe over the age of 60. But what is the consequence long term potentially if somebody's not thinking about that? So there's a lot of risks to not getting enough protein when you're on the medication and not maintaining muscle. And so working with someone that's maybe doing some testing, maybe body composition, and making sure you're maintaining muscle is important.
When you start
And
to
this is not.
when you start to lose that lean muscle, it's really hard to get it back. I mean,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
not easy, and you have to be
Oh, it's not.
the
Yeah, you
the
have to.
method in which you
Well,
have to employ in order to gain that muscle back is going to be counterproductive
to the
coming
weight. Yeah,
from
the
the
weight.
perspective of an
Mhm.
endurance athlete. So, I mean, it's
'Cause you're
my,
gonna have to focus on the weight room way more. Like,
yes,
you're gonna have
absolutely.
to eat potentially in a little bit of a surplus, like, or
Yeah,
at least meet.
you're gonna have to eat in the
Yeah,
surplus in order to get the
and you're
to bulk up a little bit
gaining a
in
little
order
bit of
to
weight.
build that muscle back, which is going to be counterproductive to what it is that he's trying to achieve right now.
Right.
The
And
point
then yeah.
that I was trying to make with him, that I was really trying to drive home to him,
Mhm.
was not just the loss of lean muscle mass, but the risk that he was opening up for bone remodeling. Because I mean,
Oh,
as
yeah. Mhm.
runners, as a cyclist, it may not be that big of a deal because it's a non-impact activity, but we do run. And so
Right.
my concern with him was that, okay, if you're in such a caloric deficit, I imagine your recovery is already inhibited. I don't know what the quality of your sleep is like, so because that's where the restorative process takes place. But I was like, you're really upping the chances of you developing things like stress fractures and everything if you
It's
continue to train for performance. I believe that his risk profile changes, which is why
Mhm.
we would have to change the training method. If you're going to be in this much of a caloric deficit, we can't train for
Right.
performance. We're going to have to train for a different methodology because I'm
Right.
not willing to take on that risk as a coach to have you come down with a stress fracture because you're in such a caloric deficit and your body can't restore the damage that you've done to it. So it's not just muscle loss, but it's the structural integrity that you've now put in jeopardy as a result.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah. The injury risk is quite high. Like, he may not even make it to the race because he could end up injured. I mean, just even muscularly not recovering. I mean, there's probably risk there, from more of a muscular standpoint as well. I mean, if you think about it, we need it for cycling, power running, economy, injury prevention.
You become unstable. So you just don't
Yeah.
have full control over your body movement. Just controlling your
Mhm.
body becomes more and more difficult the more strength you lose. And as you lose lean muscle, you're going to be losing strength. So the concern that I would have would be, okay, how are you still able to control the body movement that you need? Because I mean that's important when it comes to swimming. It's important when it comes to cycling and running. So just
Mhm.
being able to manage the way that the body moves and what muscles are engaged. This whole thing was just really kind of stressing me out as I was talking to this guy. And
Yeah, but you told me it
thank
was
God
stressful.
I'm not your coach, man, because this would be a really hard conversation that I would have to have with him. So
Yeah, I was like, that was just stressing me out thinking about it. More just I'm like worried for him a little bit, like, okay, like I hope he's gonna be okay.
yeah.
You're doing this, but hopefully you'll come out of it okay. Like, but the risks are there. So yeah, if I, thinking of it from that perspective of like coaching, I just hope somebody's kind of being a reason, like kind of giving some reason or some helpful checks and balances of some sort. But it doesn't sound like it, but maybe. I just hope somebody's helping him figure this out and he's not like just doing this sort of totally on his own, or there's somebody of reason like kind of like helping to give him some thoughts about it that maybe, I mean, I don't know. It sounds like he's kind of just doing it, but hard to say. But yeah, let's go on. I think like some of the other risks of fueling specifically when we talk
Mhm.
about like the gut motility piece is another one. So I think of myself like training. I mean, not everybody's like this. Every athlete's a little different, but I run into a lot of athletes that are like this where they really struggle to get enough to eat when they're training a lot, especially in the heat already.
Mhm.
Struggling to eat enough. Imagine if you felt like full and never hungry all the time and it took longer for the contents to get through your gut. Like that could be hard to manage, I think. So it would be harder to like fuel, even to have like the 3 meals and like pre and post snack. For athletes, it's like you need to eat your meals, but you kind of sometimes when you're in a hard training phase, you also have to be eating other times. And to eat that frequently might be very hard. It might be hard to consume gels. It might impact how well you can fuel during your training. And if you're not really able to eat a lot after to be able to recover, it might be compromised. So those are things I would consider. And yeah, if you're like, are you fueling for your 20-mile run? Like for me, I'm never that hungry anyways after that. So I'm trying to imagine like not being need to not be hungry and never have that hunger come. Like I'd be forcing myself
Yeah.
to eat enough, potentially if I was on the medication. So it might be something to think about. Um, so yeah, let's like look at some of the other GI side effects that kind of come with it, because I don't think we mentioned that maybe. I don't know if
Yeah.
we talked about the GI
No.
side effects, but there are some. So like nausea, vomiting, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, like early fullness. Those are all some of our side effects that can happen with the medication. So not everyone experiences this, but it's pretty common to have some of these GI side effects, or at least one or two of them. So imagine trying to like train every day and you're like, I feel nauseated, or I want to vomit, or I'm bloated, or I'm full. You know what I mean?
Right.
So those are all things we want to kind of consider.
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to, trying to come up with a nutrition strategy for training and for racing, I imagine that this has to be something that you have to take into account on your body's ability to not just get it in, but absorb what it is that it's trying to take in, which is why I think that we tend to see more of this bonking is not just from, a glycogen depletion, but because you are going into the training sessions already depleted, but you have an inability to fuel during sessions. So, I can imagine, especially when it comes to longer endurance events like 70.3s and full Ironman and marathons. I mean, there's no way that you can execute those types of races without some kind of nutrition strategy to implement. So I guess the question that I would have would be if you time it such that you are off the meds when it comes to let's just use that scenario. The guy had 8 weeks left for his training plan, where let's say that he made his race weight, he went ahead and trained for the 8 weeks. Is there any risk to the GI tract for the ability to implement a nutrition strategy 8
Mm,
weeks post coming off of the meds? Is there a latency where, you know,
That's a good
it
question.
just takes a while for the drugs and the symptoms to try and work their way out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know when you stop it, like how long it kind of, because some of them are taken, on like Ozempic, for instance, is a injectable medication, so it lasts like a week, right?
Yeah.
So there may be some, I'm sure it wears off at some point, because I do know that for diabetes, people with diabetes, like you can kind of see it in their blood sugar, like the last few days before they take their injectable again, you kind of see the glucose start to rise. So it's kind of wearing off a little bit, but there can be some, where it kind of stays around a little bit depending on the medication. So would it be 8 weeks? Probably not. I think it would probably wear off. But, if you're not able to practice your fueling strategy,
Yeah.
I mean, 8 weeks doesn't leave you a lot of time to really practice that, so that would be more my concern would be like, okay, if you're not really fueling that well during because you're not able to get much down, while you're using the medication, then if you only have a small amount window of time to kind of practice fueling, it doesn't leave you a lot of opportunity to do that. And if you do have some lingering side effects, then that even leaves you less time. So that could be definitely a concern, is just like the fueling
Well, how
aspect of it in a sense.
is there an impact on the body if you're in a persistent caloric deficit and glycogen stores stay depleted for a significant amount of time, does it affect the body's efficiency in absorbing carbs
I don't
when
know.
you
Yeah.
reintroduce it? So let's say that this guy was able to fuel efficiently for a race, but has he now done anything to the way that his body behaves and takes in fuel when he
Yeah,
comes
I
off
mean,
of the
we might,
meds?
yeah, because we do have like enzymes and different like transporters that we have for like absorbing and digesting carbs, and that could be impacted. So maybe just don't have as many of the enzymes and transporters. So that could make it harder, essentially, like even to try to train your gut back in that short
Yeah.
amount of time would be really hard. To kind of get your gut used to all of it again in 8 weeks, it gives you little, like, not very much time. So,
Mhm.
yeah, those are all good questions because those are things I guess I wasn't exactly thinking about, but I think that's worth thinking about if it's impacting the ability for you to fuel, then, if you're only have a certain number of weeks to kind of be off the medication or to be maintaining and then trying to fuel and you have all these changes in the way your gut is utilizing carbs, that could really make it hard for you to fuel for the race as well. So, yeah, and I think also, like, the other things too I'm thinking about just kinda looking through some of the other risks that were, um I think dehydration is one we mentioned just because it might
Mm.
be harder to drink a lot. If you're
Yeah.
filling up your gut with fluids, then you're maybe not fluid drinking, but also, like, that hypoglycemia risk, kinda looking back at that, like, if it's athletes have generally an increased sensitivity to insulin already because of all the activity that we're doing, and so you're adding on something that maybe is influencing glucose, like, is there more of a risk of, like, some sort of hypoglycemia where you're gonna hit these bottom out where your blood glucose really goes low, and that could be risky, right? So if we're not monitoring blood sugars, maybe that could be an issue, or if someone's taking the medication and constantly feeling like shaky or kind of fatigued or like confused or like, kind of having some of those symptoms of hypoglycemia, that could be a risk. And you don't really want to be like on a ride or something and have like a hypoglycemic episode because that could actually be dangerous
Yeah.
because you might fall or get hit or something. You might get an accident or something. So those are all, I think, things like I really want people to kind of think about. I mean, the potentially if you're using them for a long period of time, there could be some micronutrient deficiencies that may occur. So always something to kind of think about. Um, if we're not eating enough in general, or you're not maybe getting enough nutrients. So that's always something like just like with any bariatric surgery, they always recommend taking a multivitamin and some,
Yep.
certain nutrients to like make sure you're just getting enough. And that would be something I would generally maybe recommend in this scenario too. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the big question is like, could could this actually hurt performance? And I think I think we've concluded that in this scenario you're talking about with this gentleman where somebody's taking the medications in the middle of their training plan trying to lose maybe somewhat significant amount of weight, it absolutely could,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because I mean, fueling and recovery and all of those things that it takes to like the day-to-day consistency of training and having your training, consistently getting more and more fit and like improving, day to day. Not every day are you improving in your fitness, but it's that, that cycle of fueling your workouts, recovering, doing it over again and over again that gets you better. It's not, the weight is arbitrary kind of in that scenario if you're not doing that. And I think we've kind of made that point. Um,
Yeah.
and we've already talked about kind of who might benefit. So
So like
what
an illustration, if I had an athlete who wanted to pursue this strategy, the way that I would talk to them about this is like, okay, let's think of this. We have a bucket, right? And we've used kind of like a bucket methodology before when we've talked about stress and things like that. But I want to talk about this bucket where we're going to fill it, and filling it is gaining fitness. So for me as a coach, if that's the strategy, I can't fill the bucket as full if this is the strategy that you want, because you're not going to be able to recover, adapt,
Yeah.
absorb. And so if this is a successful experiment in his mind, where it's like, okay, I reached race weight. But if I said, but if your bucket is only half full, have you really gained have you really gained anything? You're now going into your race, yes, at this magic number, but your fitness bucket isn't as full as it would have been if you had just accepted the higher number of your weight.
Mhm.
And it's like building a house. You know, we lay in a brick, and that brick is, oh, he makes his race weight. But if it means that I have to take like 3 and 4 bricks out of the foundation, do you have a stronger foundation? No. I mean, because
No.
the costs were so much higher than the benefit of this one thing. Yeah,
Right.
you had one aspect of this perceived performance possibility, like your performance potential would have been some function or correlation with what your weight is. But if it then jeopardized 3 or 4 things that we know contribute to fitness and performance, then have you gained? And I would say that no, you haven't.
No.
You're
Yeah,
now
no,
going into
yeah.
the race a weaker athlete,
Depleted. Yeah.
more depleted, and
Less
worse
fit. Yeah.
situation and worse fitness than if you had just said, my weight is what it is. I'm just going to now focus on being as strong as I possibly can and as durable as I can and stack on as much fitness as I can and make it deep and not just worry
Mhm.
about what this number is.
Right.
Because I can
Absolutely.
guarantee if you go into the race and the race is hot, your performance is already now in jeopardy because you can't perform like you would, in cooler temperatures. So this quote unquote potential performance is not guaranteed just because
And you never know,
the
like, who
so-called
to
race
have
weight.
that be your goal anyways, to have your goal be, like, the podium, like, you never know who's gonna show up. I mean, there's so many things riding on that to have that be, like,
Yes, absolutely.
you're gonna be angry. I don't know. There's definitely something a little bit more going on there that maybe I would question also as a
Yeah.
coach. Like, okay, what we need to think about that. We need to talk about this a little more, kind of dig in. But I don't know who's maybe the coach is trying to do that, and it's like
I don't know.
they're
Yeah.
this is not getting through. So it's hard to say. But let's say let's say in a different scenario, like maybe what type of scenario might this be something somebody could use? I think it's just very similar to when we talked about like losing weight, like weight loss for endurance athletes. It's a very similar.
Yeah.
So, we did a Zoom. I think it's on our YouTube. It's like one of our very first things. We did like a Zoom call that we talked about it. I think we uploaded as a video, and we maybe talked a little bit about it in that episode 73 too. But it's just really not trying to do any of this weight loss scenario in your lead up to a race. So whenever you start that training plan, that 16, usually anywhere between 12 and 18 weeks before the race, that
Mhm.
should not be when you're like, oh, I'm going to use a GLP medication to lose 20 or more pounds or something. Like that's not that's not a good time. I would really advise you not to do that. If you haven't lost the weight you want to lose by that point, you just have to let it go, and you might lose a little bit in the training, because I know I lose like a pound or two usually. Sometimes people lose a little more, but that shouldn't be the goal. Once you've started that training plan for a race,
Yeah.
like you need to let the goal of race weight, you need to let it go, because unless you have 5 or 10 pounds only to lose, that might be a reasonable amount to try to lose in that time frame. Very small, half a pound, maybe less a week, and you could eventually get there. You just, it's not a good time to do it. So
Right.
don't do that. Instead, either give yourself time, like in between races when you haven't signed up for anything, or over the winter, or sometime when you're not training, and you can do some exercise and maybe maintain fitness, maintain strength, and enough time to lose. Safe weight loss is only 1 to 2 pounds a week is what's really considered safe, unless you have a significant amount to lose, and you can lose maybe 4 or 5 if you have a lot. But at most people, it's 1 or 2 pounds a week. Calculate how much you need to lose. Think, well, okay, well, maybe at most 2 pounds a week. What is that? What's that range that it gives me? And then try to lose it that way. And if you have to use the GLP medication, that's fine. It's a tool, but make sure you're watching, not losing too much weight. I know people want to lose weight, but when we lose too much, it's a significant impact on our body composition, and it can actually have negative consequences for our metabolism and long term. So we want to make sure it's a safe weight loss. We want to make sure if we're adding the medication, we're working with a physician and maybe a dietitian or a sports dietitian to like make sure you're getting enough protein, you're timing the meals correctly, and do it other time, but don't do it. Maybe you have to take a whole fall off. Like you have to take the entire fall or the entire spring off to work on this, and that's fine. Because if that's really what you think is going to help you, then and you really feel like the medication is going to help you, that's fine. But do it safely and do it in a way that's not going to compromise your performance and do it in a way that's not going to compromise your long-term health or your current health. And get there and then have a plan for how you're going to maintain it, or maybe then once you're at where you want to be, then you start your training program and working with someone to help you maintain and fuel adequately while maintaining the weight loss. That's fine, but that's how I would advise it. And so I don't think it's necessarily don't do it like it's bad, I'm not saying that at all, but just do it smartly.
You gotta have a strategy.
It's
Is
a
Yeah.
strategy. It's part of. Then we talked about plans last week. This whole plan, your plan will be this,
Yeah.
Well, maybe if I'm working with an athlete that wants to do that, I'm like, okay, now our plan changes. We're trying to maintain some fitness, maintain your muscle mass, and work on weight loss. And maybe you're adding the medication as a tool to do that, and that's fine. But these are the things we're working on, and this is now your plan. And it's not a training plan. It's not like you're training for a race. It's now a weight loss fitness maintenance plan, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's how I would recommend doing it. Whatever weight you need to lose, and if you feel like you need to lose it, just do it in a way that is smart, and you're not compromising health and performance. So, um, yeah, I
I
don't
mean,
know.
yeah,
I think
if
that's a
I mean, I have to be honest that when I was talking with this guy, I started thinking strategically in my own from my own perspective. Okay, I'm going to take my coach's hat off now, and I'm going to put my athlete hat on. Is there a viable strategy where I could implement this and have it be effective and getting me where I want to be? I mean, because I have to be honest about that. I mean, it's just, do I still have weight that I want to lose? Yes, I do. It's definitely, I have about 20% of my body weight that I feel like I could comfortably lose and not feel weak. I think that it would put me in a pretty good spot. Now, okay, with that 20%, what am I willing to give up? Am I willing to give up racing, in order to switch my training from performance to just going into a fitness maintenance mode, and really like the weight loss is the primary goal and not, gaining fitness is the primary goal. I mean, I have to be
that's
completely honest that I thought about this as well, so
yeah. I mean, I
is
don't
this a
think there's
viable
anything wrong with
strategy?
thinking about that, and
Yeah,
it
when
might
can I use
benefit
it? When
you.
should I not use it? Or is it something that I should just say, look, this doesn't fit what it is that I want to accomplish.
You have to really think about what you want to accomplish though, because just looking at your training plan now, I think you would have to really cut back a bit on what you're doing currently because yeah, because then you're almost you have to be careful because if your focus is weight loss and you're still training a lot, it's just hard to kind of really grasp like because you're with the medication, you're also not that hungry. It's just really easy to undereat. And then you put yourself in a hole. Even if you're not training for something, you could still put yourself at risk, just like this gentleman did. So you have to be careful, because now you're adding in a different component, and that's the reduction of hunger and some of that, those elements that make it harder to eat. So I think it's a lot more controllable if you can kind of have less training volume and maybe focus on like one strength training, like one workout a day instead of doing more than that. And, volume wise would have to go down quite a bit just to be able to really focus on the weight loss piece. And I don't know how hard that would be for you. That would be what I would be worried about for you. I mean, that's the other piece here is just because you're not in a training plan. If you're still doing a lot of training, you could still put yourself at risk for some of this stuff, but you just don't have a race at the end of it to kind of see how that goes negatively or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so you still could put yourself at risk for injury or relative energy deficiency. You don't have to be thin to have that happen to you, essentially. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I think
So.
I think the one thing that's keeping me from thinking that this is a viable strategy for myself is because I've spent so much time and effort trying to get stronger in the weight room, and the amount of time that I've spent in there, just the possibility of losing whatever muscle that I've actually gained over the years that I've been trying to gain it back, it's a major red flag for me. It's one thing that's really holding me
Yeah.
back from attempting it, knowing that is a possibility, and all the hard work that I've put in just to try and get stronger.
You would probably want to have it, definitely work on getting enough protein and then have the strength be a big emphasis in your program and then just have the cardio, enough cardio to maintain fitness. Does that make sense? So that you would keep that
Yeah.
muscle essentially. So, and that's the other thing I would advise. I guess I didn't mention that, but if someone were to do this, that when they were in that phase, in that plan of weight loss, they would definitely need to be doing strength training. There's no compromise there. If you're going to be on these medication, you're doing yourself a disservice, I suppose, if you're not doing strength training in addition to taking
Should
the
it be
medication.
the primary focus? We're not talking just like,
I would say
oh,
so. Yeah.
two sessions a
Oh,
week,
yeah.
and that's strength training.
Like
That's not what we're
3
talking
sessions.
about.
I would say the more
Yeah.
you can do, the better. The more you can focus on strength, the better. So it would be like truly, and it may not be necessarily even to like gain muscle. It would be like really with the, I mean, you might if you were doing it really well timed and planned, but you probably would just maintain muscle as the goal to not lose muscle. So yeah, I would, anyone who comes to me and taking the medication, I'm always like, yeah, you need to be strength training.
Yeah.
That's a big piece of it. The muscle piece should be a big, big factor for most people. I hope people, are thinking about that. So for you, it'd be just like, yeah, really focusing on strength, in a sense, like you're not having to do it every day, but at least 3 times a week. And then
That's
the
what I was about to say.
cardio.
Three to 4 sessions a week would probably be like my
Yeah. Yeah.
recommendation
You don't have to go
on
like
what
crazy like a
I would
bodybuilder,
implement.
but
Yeah, we're not trying to bulk and,
no, 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 just to maintain. So 3 times a week, maybe 4, and then cardio on the other days. Or if you do 2 sessions, you're just really not wanting to be a lot of volume. So it'd just be, maintaining as best you can muscle and maintaining as best you can like the fitness somewhat. I mean, you might lose a little bit, but you'll gain it back.
But
So
you still can't go into these sessions with full power. So it's not like you can just go into the weight
not
room. It's
really.
like, okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna
I
do
wouldn't
3
do
to
that.
4
Yeah.
strength sessions a week. But even then, the quality of those sessions are going to be suspect because of
Well, you'll be in an
such the
energy
caloric
deficit.
deficit
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you may not be able to even lift heavy in order to
Yeah.
maintain muscle.
Right,
So
yeah. So,
these are
yeah, I agree,
definitely the
yeah.
consequences and things that you have to consider if you're going
Mhm.
to use this approach. And
As an athlete
as an
specifically
athlete,
too,
so you
yeah.
just have to figure
Or
out
for anybody. Yeah.
are the benefits, do they outweigh the costs?
Mhm.
And even if and what's the longevity of the results that you're hoping to achieve? Are you able to maintain that weight loss that you achieved, knowing full well that you're not going to be able to stay on those drugs the whole time or
Mhm.
indefinitely unless I don't even know. I don't even know how I would approach an athlete who is going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
stay on those drugs for indefinitely. Like
Well, they might,
how would I
the
train them?
dose goes up a little bit, like, usually they'll start at a low dose and bring it up to kinda where there's a happy place where you're losing weight, but not too much weight. So if you're wanting to stay on the medication to maintain, I'm assuming you would kinda go on maybe one of the lowest doses, so it may
Mm,
not be as much of a GI side effect. You still might have some, but then you would be managing it probably similar to someone who would have, like, gastric bypass, so you'd just have to try different types of gels and kinda work with the way their gut was working, but maybe not even to that same extent because there wouldn't be such a small stomach. So you might be I think you would be f I think someone in that scenario would maybe be okay, um, but they're always kind of battling against potentially that, reduction of hunger too, so, but with the lower dose, maybe not to the same degree, just enough to maybe, maintain the weight. I don't know, like, I feel like there's not a ton of any researcher really, and I haven't worked with enough endurance athletes yet who have had this scenario, to be honest, so I don't even know all of the extent to which it would cause GI issues after you're done, or like if you were on a low dose, would it still be a big problem? Like, I don't know at this point. I don't even know if anyone knows. Maybe there's somebody out there working a lot with endurance athletes taking these medications that kind of seen that, but I would say it's not something I've seen a whole lot yet. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what the consequences there, yet. So it's hard to say. So I guess there's a risk there because we don't know. I think it's just important, yeah, to kind of weigh the pros and cons for yourself. If someone's thinking about doing it and just realize like what it might take if they want to use the medication, what they have to really keep in mind and really, really think about what the race weight really means. If you have this very specific weight in mind that you think you need to be at, it's one thing if you just want to lose a little bit of weight because you think you'd be faster and you're not really having like a specific outcome. And it could be 10 pounds or 30, and you're just trying to see, get to a point where maybe you feel better or something. But it's another thing if you have a very specific, like very low body weight that you want to achieve, or even if it's unrealistic, is it really even realistic? Like to really ask yourself these questions before you dive into something. Because I think there's maybe more there to explore. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, to me, it just feels like somebody needs a better why than just say, oh, I want to make race weight. There has to be more to it.
Or
If
I
you
want
were
to
to
make the podium.
Yeah, if you were to come to me and it's like, look, I've got 20% of my body weight that I want to lose. I have constant joint pain. Stuff like that, then I think okay, now we're going down the path of let's see if this is a justifiable
Yeah.
approach. But if you just came to me and just said, look, I've got 15 pounds to lose, it's like less than like 10% of my body weight, and I want to do it because I think that my performance is going to be a function of my weight, then I have to have a serious conversation with it.
And
With
then
that,
your
it's
expectation
like,
is like, I'm
I,
gonna have this weight and therefore I'm gonna
yeah,
get on the podium. Like that's the expectation and the thought around it. I think, yeah, there needs to be a little bit of a deeper discussion there of what's driving that and like kind of where that's coming from. It's hard because I do know weight is sometimes a hard topic for people because there is a lot of stigma and I know people struggle a bit and so hopefully we were able to kind of come at this from that, thinking about it from different scenarios and not so much like, oh, you shouldn't do this if you're in this one scenario, but more so, really like the question of why you want to lose weight and the why behind it, I think is worth like digging into a little bit more, regardless of where you're at. But I hopefully we came at it in a way that wasn't like judgmental or it's hard
yeah.
sometimes. I think people sometimes feel that way, but I really think, I really do think these medications can have a lot of benefits. So I don't want to come across as these are bad or there's danger to them, but we always have to weigh the pros and cons and the risks and the benefits. And so they have a lot of benefits, but there's also risks. And as for endurance athletes, some of those benefits and risks might be more so there might be different ones and maybe more serious risks because of what an endurance athlete is doing with their training and day to day, kind of the amount that their stress they're putting on their body, already. So I do think it needs to be considered, or these
Yeah.
things need to be considered. So yeah, that's how I want to leave it. I don't know if you have any
Yeah,
last minute
no, I think this
thoughts.
this wraps it up. I don't think that there's much else that we could say. I do think that I don't feel like we've been judgmental about it, and I don't think that we've been saying, hey, this is something that you have to stay away from. I think that we've had a frank and honest conversation about, when it would be a viable strategy and things to consider so that you can make an informed decision and at least start to trigger some additional questions that you should be asking yourself, or if you're working with a coach, maybe talking to them about that. So I think this wraps it up. So this has been episode 109 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, where we've talked about the use and the relationship of GLP-1 drugs with endurance athletes and sports. If this episode has resonated with you, we hope that you will leave a comment or a review and subscribe, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it on whatever podcast platform you consume your content from. I hope that you will subscribe so that you don't miss any other future episodes. We have a nice library that you can go back to previous conversations that we've had. In fact, there's 108 of them. So you can go back and check out any of those. If this episode you feel may help somebody that you know, that either they're on GLP-1s or they're talking about it, or you know that they may have some concerns over weight, which is reasonable given the stigma of weight in endurance sports, where people think that we should look a certain way in order to perform. If you think that this episode would help them, I hope that you will consider passing it along and sharing the episode with them. Because we do not have sponsors, we do not have ads, and so we're not trying to sell you supplements or drugs or hemp mattresses or anything like that. So we wanted to come to you unfettered and uncommitted to anybody else, so that we can have frank and honest conversations with you and just share information. So leaving comments and reviews is the one thing that does help the exposure of the podcast and helps other people find us as well. So I hope that you will consider that. It doesn't take much, just a click on whatever stars you like, or just a brief comment to put some context behind it. Those are greatly appreciated and really, really help. We also have the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. It's a closed group on Facebook. You can go and answer one simple question, agree to the group rules. That is an area that we created from day one that allows you to connect with other listeners, connect with us, the hosts. And there is if you're listening to this and you haven't been out there yet, go out there and check out the poll that we posted, because both Katie and I have done training build specific episodes where she's done her road to Grandma's Marathon. I did a build for Ironman Florida 70.3 last year. If those types of episodes were helpful to you, you enjoyed them, you like listening to how we train and how we approach, the races that we do as athletes, not just as coaches, go and check out that poll and vote and let us know that those episodes were helpful. I know that we still have plans for racing in the future, but whether we share that build with you and create content out of it, we only want to do that if you find them helpful and useful and relate to them. So let us know what you think. You can send us emails, you can send us messages, you can go and vote in the poll, however you want to reach out to us. That would be greatly appreciated. So thank you for that. Both of us are active coaches, so we're bringing on athletes onto our rosters. And so if you're interested in hiring a coach, or you want somebody to help you move forward with training plans, or you're just tired of trying to figure out what workouts you should be doing and how much you should be doing or how little you should be doing, what should you focus on, what not to focus, we hope that you will consider either one of us or both of us as your coach, for that matter. If you want to reach out to Coach Katie, you can go to fuel2run.com. She does dietetics for all sports, as well as run coaching and run plans. I do single sport and multi-sport training plans, as well as one-on-one coaching. You can go to tabularossaracing.com and reach out to me, and I'm Coach Justin. We'd love to talk to you no matter what. So I think this wraps it all up. So I want to thank you guys for the time that you continue to spend with us. This has been a little bit of a lengthy episode, so we thank you for hanging in there. But we think that it's been a reasonable conversation, and I think it's an important one to have. So thank you guys for hanging in there. We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, I've been your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. This has been episode 109 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and we look forward to coming to you next time. Thanks a lot for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularossaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.